We are a people of an explorer gene. We're hunters in a farmer's society. We're bored. And again, and so that brings me to the daylight savings time. I get so bored every day. It's supposed to be daylight savings time, but yet I can't go hunting because it's dark when I get off work. I mean, what's wrong? WTF? Daylight savings time? And guess who came up with it? That's right, Benjamin Franklin. And as Dr. Dale Archer said, he probably had ADHD, and I quote, in abundance. And so, and we're talking, and speaking of daylight savings time, stop calling this show for Rural Party Line. Okay, maybe you've got daylight savings time messed up. Stop calling the show WTF. It starts before the show. And then that brings me to the gas. I'm in Houston, and the gas is $2.09, and I drive to Cameron, and it's $2.35. What's going on, WTF? And that brings me to a close on the WTF moments, and we'll be back after this with an LTC attorney segment. Thank you.
Golly. Awesome. All right. You do a mic check for me? Because I'm not going to speak as loudly as he is. Because my ADHD was cured.
With a good whooping, probably.
That's
right.
I was going to say,
Pistols, rifles, shotguns, ammo, knives, and a whole lot more. ANC Firearms, 254-983-4417.
Power. Sometimes you just need more.
So,
What do you do when that yard equipment needs
I'm going to ask you
or just isn't working like it used to? The answer
about
is
this. No one sells firearm ammunition to any person who has. So I'm knowing I'm selling a firearm. But I don't know whether they've got these convictions or anything.
Right.
I'm knowingly selling it, and that's what it says. Knowingly sells a firearm. There's the U.S. code. It's very specific. So,
Did you see that link I sent?
the answer is, I didn't notice anything else. Oh, I got all this.
There was a link on there.
If you've decided to carry a handgun,
This foreign national.
you better know what you're doing.
It was really screwed
If you
up.
don't, you better learn fast. Not only
It was like 2010. It
See,
guys.
so I think the answer is you got to look at the legislative history.
Well, no, the feds show up because the guy sells a firearm at a gun show to an illegal foreign national who had a valid Texas driver's license.
Email me at aaronsgunshop@gmail.com.
And they said you still should have known that he was an illegal foreign national because he was Mexican, he spoke Spanish, and he wore cowboy boots.
We have seminars to cover most forms of firearms training.
You go pull it up.
How does that follow?
You go pull it up. Illegal sale of firearms to illegal foreign national. This story pops up like the first 5 things.
But the U.S. code says that
It should have known.
No, you didn't say that. It says knowing or having reasonable cause to believe.
Reasonable cause to believe.
So that gives you reasonable cause.
Reasonable cause to believe.
Well, what if you're
That's
from
right.
What if you're from Cameron, Texas, where everybody speaks Spanish and wears cowboy boots?
Yeah.
That's what I'm gonna say.
Mesothelioma, birth trauma, defective products, and injury and death resulting from car and truck wrecks. Call the tough, experienced injury.
Where is Matt's?
Catalino
I'm trying. Where's Matt's stuff? Information.
Call 888-MESO-FIRM or
I have no idea.
254-697-4965.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
CD? What he does at Aaron's Gun Shop?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's time for our LCT attorney segment. We're here with Rick Dodd, and we're talking about the private transfer and private sale of firearms without using a gun dealer. How you doing today, Rick?
I'm doing great today. By the way, my disease was cured. My dad had a leather strap that hung on the window, and that was my big farmer medicine. So I don't suffer from ADHD anymore.
I probably didn't get enough of those as well, I got plenty, but I don't know that I got enough. And so
I was over at the stock show a while ago, and I see they're having the heifer sale, and it kind of reminded me back when you were a good-looking young man and sold me a goat over there. I think you won first place. So did you name
I
those
conned
goats?
you too, huh?
Did you name those goats?
No.
Oh, that's a
was
good idea. You're never supposed to name what you're fixing to eat. By
That's
the way,
right,
it
that's
tasted
right.
really good, Ross.
Well, I think tell the folks how they can get in contact with you.
Oh, they can reach me at respectforyou.com. They can check out our website there. They can give us a call at 800-460-0606. We do quite a bit of asbestos work, so one of the websites is asbestoslaw.com, and call us at 888-MESO-FIRM.
And so,
by golly, we're here in Cameron, you know. I mean, how hard can it be? You just ask anybody.
that's right. And so, I guess today we're talking about, though, specifically to the show, is the transfer of firearms. And so, I think this is pretty important. You know, with the holidays coming up, with family members maybe transferring to them, you got friends and family. Maybe you want to sell a gun to a nephew or a kid. So I think this is important for anybody listening that is thinking about selling or buying a firearm from somebody that they know that's not a shop, academy, or a dealer. And so what is the first major thing we just need to know not to do?
Well, first off, we need to know that if we're going to sell firearms on some sort of regular basis, that we have to have a federal license. And to get that federal license or not to get that federal license becomes a question of whether or not you fit under certain categories. Now, the interesting part of that is that I had always thought that if you sold like more than 20 guns a year or 10 guns a year, that you had to get a license. But that's not true. The question really is whether you intend to make a profit, whether you do it on a regular business. In other words, if you inherit a bunch of guns, for instance, and you want to liquidate them, you might sell 300 or 400 guns in 1 year, but that doesn't require you to have a license. If you go to, say, some gun shows, and you buy a few guns with the intention of going to the next gun show and sell them, even though it may be 4 or 5, and then you start doing that on a systematic basis, and you may only sell 10 or 15 a year, but that's a systematic basis of selling guns for a profit. That's when you need a license. Let me give you another example here. When you have someone who, say, has 3 or 4 guns at home and she no longer wants them, she goes ahead and sells a couple of them. She puts some advertisement in the newspaper and sells them. And then she figures out, hey, this is a pretty good idea. So then she buys a few off the newspaper and sells them. And pretty soon she has a card with her name on it. She needs a license. And that's really all there is to it.
And so what about just the transfer? Let's say if I want to just, like you said, maybe I inherit a couple guns and I don't want them. Maybe I don't really go hunting very much anymore. I live in the city. Or maybe I want to sell some to my friend or my other family members who want to buy it from me. I don't need a license for that.
Well, there's a couple of codes, if you may. One of them is the 46.06 A and B that talk about that. There's also some U.S. codes. The thing about law, codes, as you know, well know, being an attorney,
That's right.
especially being a criminal attorney, is that they're not always black and white. You would think that the folks down in Austin would be able to write them such that everybody can look at them and understand exactly and precisely what they mean. But, I guess words being somewhat limited, we're not able to do that. Plus, you got to remember that a bunch of those guys down there are lawyers, so they want to make sure that you and I have business, right? So they make them a little bit complex. So, say for instance, you want to be sure that there's a difference between handguns and firearms.
And why is that?
Well, like for instance in Penal Code A1, 46.06 A1, it talks about handguns with regard to things like, well, if you sell, rent, lease, loan, or give a handgun to anybody knowing that that person who you're giving it to intends to use it unlawfully or commit an unlawful act with it, then that's illegal.
And so basically the code section is talking about here that you cannot transfer a gun for an unlawful purpose. You cannot give a handgun to someone who you know is going to go out there and commit a crime. Now, it's funny to me why the statute makes a distinction between handguns and firearms. I think that if you know that somebody's going to commit an offense and you give them the firearm, not the firearm, but any kind of firearm, handgun or firearm, if you give them that gun to go commit that offense, I think you're going to be probably guilty of aiding and abetting.
Yeah, and that gets into a gray area.
It does.
Again, that sort of flips into a different statute than the firearm statute. It is aiding and abetting is, kind of helping somebody out. If you know they're going to go commit a crime, you say, here, take this shotgun with you, then you're probably going to be convicted of the same crime that they're convicted of, because they're treated pretty much the same.
Okay, so what about maybe? Let's talk about if you wanna what about a father? Can he give his 16-year-old son a deer rifle for Christmas?
Sure, you can. The thing about transferring firearms to a minor, if you're going to transfer a firearm to someone who's under, say, 18 years old, you can do that by getting parental consent, or a guardian. A guardian or parent can give consent for their under 18-year-old person to get a firearm. So if you're going to give it to someone like that, you need to make sure that they have consent. If you're going to sell it to someone or loan it to them, you need to make sure that that person has consent. Otherwise, you will yourself have committed a crime.
When you say consent, is there ever a difference between written consent and verbal consent, or do you just need the consent?
Only if someone is accused of lying.
And
So if you have it written, then nobody's going to lie about it, right?
okay, so let's say that my sister and I aren't really getting along, but I love my nephew, and so I want to sell him a gun, or I want to sell my dad's shotgun to my 14-year-old nephew. So as long as if I called my sister and asked her if that would be okay, is that necessarily going to keep me absolutely protected?
No, and the words necessarily and absolutely are where you get me on that. Your sister, if she hates you, she could turn around then and lie, like I just suggested, and say, oh, no, I never told him he could do that. And here you have a child who is under 17 years old that you're talking about, which that gets us into another category.
And so, folks, directly on point here is that if you give a firearm to a minor, okay, and it's a gift, then all you got to have is the parent's verbal consent. The parent can say that they gave you consent. But if you sell a firearm to a minor, you actually have to have written consent. You have to have written parental consent of the custodian in order to sell that firearm. And that's important because you need to have proof that they gave the consent. And so, yes, I understand that family members get along, but I can tell you that in my business, doing family law, estate planning, right, and probate, and criminal law, family members lie all the time. And so we're not necessarily thinking that they're actually going to lie to come after you, but what if something happens to that child and they're just trying to protect their own self? And they may put the blame on you. I didn't know he had that gun. I didn't give him that gun. I don't know where he got that gun. And then it's going to come back on you. And so I would say that the safest thing to do in every situation when you're selling to a minor is to get the consent of the custodian or the parent in writing.
Yeah, because it's illegal. It's a crime if you make available a readily dischargeable firearm, and it can be loaded. It doesn't necessarily have to have one in the chamber, but it's loaded. And if the person, and they call it negligently, failed to secure it, well, I'm not sure what they mean by negligently. Maybe they just flat out failed on purpose to secure it. And if that child less than 17 years old gets a hold of it and hurts somebody with it, either himself or somebody else, then you've committed a crime. I actually, as a civil trial lawyer, I had a case like that before where the grandfather had shown a 14-year-old a pistol and said, I'm going to give this to you when you get older. And then, put it away while the child was watching him. And sure enough, when grandfather went off to the grocery store, the kid got it out and was playing with it and shot his buddy in the stomach. Fortunately for the young man who got shot, he went to the emergency room quickly and they fixed him up. And 6 months later, he was throwing the shot put. But and it was a .22 caliber, but nonetheless, it was an offense.
Which have a tendency to go anywhere after they hit you too, and so they're dangerous.
Yeah, it was really dangerous. It pierced some of his small intestines, and the doctors are able to put those together amazingly enough so that they don't come apart again, and there's really no long-term problems.
That's Matt. Say hello.
I think we got Matt Beatros on the line here. What's going on, Matt?
Dude, you sound awesome.
Hey,
You really sound good.
you're too gracious.
I had a break, and I told you I was going to call in to say hi. I just want to thank you guys for taking over and marching on while I'm out here doing some serious training with some local churches, and we're having a great time. But you're doing an awesome job. I just want to tell you thank you for squaring me away there. And Trey, thank you. Rick, thank you. And having a great time on the show. And everybody, these guys got it going on. So
Hey, Matt. Matt, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
If someone wants to sell one of their private guns to someone else, would your company, your business, be willing to facilitate that for a small fee?
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of times it happens without a person like me in FFL in the process, but it's always a better idea because what happens technically when the person comes in and I sign it into my books, in reality, the gun is now mine. I own it. And then when I sign it back out, it goes to the person who signs the 4473. So the person who sold the gun has a nice paper trail and is released to the liability of the firearm.
Absolutely. And Matt, after we explain some of these laws to our listeners, I think bottom line is I'm going to recommend that they do that to fully protect themselves.
Well, I concur with that. That's always the best way to do it. Sometimes it's not possible, and if it's not possible, I was thinking alternative methods like getting a bill of sale, the signature, the social number, something that shows that, hey, at this particular date, I gave them possession of the weapon.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are some other issues that we're going to bring up, Ross and I, so you might want to listen to them, Matt.
I would love to, and I'm going to listen to the replay, but we're getting back to some serious training here, and hopefully, if everybody out there who wants some extra training, give us a call, go to the website, aaronsgunshop.com, and give me an email at aaronsgunshop@gmail.com, and I'll respond back to you. But otherwise, I want to let you guys get back at it. You're doing awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the call.
And so, I mean, we've covered minors, and he's right, and that's what I'm saying. Anytime you're going to sell the firearm, you need to get it in writing. It doesn't really matter. But I'm telling you, as far as minors, it will be a crime. It will be the crime will have been committed if you do not get it in writing and it's a sale. Okay, and so you're liable at that point.
And I want to make another point. That has to do with clubs or
Knives,
restricted knives,
exactly.
firearms. But what else is important is that it becomes a felony if it's a handgun.
Yes.
So they do make a distinction
Absolutely.
between the long gun and the short guns here.
And that's
minors.
important to point out. If you're selling the handgun to a child and you don't get it in writing, at the point that the transfer is done, you've committed a felony, regardless whether the parent tells the police that they gave verbal consent. There's got to be written consent. Okay, and so
Now, the part about the making a firearm available to a child less than 17, that is either a handgun or a long gun. It doesn't matter. So there's a couple other things you need to be aware of. You need to make sure that the person is of sound mind. Now, if you sell or otherwise dispose of a firearm knowing or having reasonable belief that such person has been adjudicated as a mental defective or been committed for any kind of a mental institution, then that's a criminal act. So that's something else you got to be careful about.
And that's kind of so. Let's talk, what if I'm involuntarily insane? For instance, if I've had way too much to drink at Worst Fest, okay, and or let's say that every Thanksgiving, my cousin and I like to go down to the tank and drink a bunch of beer and shoot snakes. I'm not saying that was always the best decision, but that's what we did. And so a lot of times I had too much, or maybe I'm just a bad shot, and I'd run out of ammo, and I'd say, "Hey man, can I pay you for my for some extra shells?" In your opinion, would that transfer be legal?
Well, now you bring up ammunition. So the answer to that would be, it depends on whether you're intoxicated or not. Now, we see it all the time where people say, well, if you drink and drive, you've committed a crime. Well, no, if you're driving while your means of
Lost the use of your mental or physical faculties.
Yeah, loss of that, then that's crime. So just drinking is not enough. But if you're intoxicated, now there is a little bit of difference, Ross, between driving while intoxicated and intoxicated with regard to selling or buying ammunition or firearms. And since you do a lot of criminal law, can you maybe share with me what that difference is? Because I didn't really understand it.
That's right. So like intoxicated as far as DWI means the loss of the use of your mental or physical faculties. And so it's got to be the police officer, or it's presumed if you've got a blood test or a breath test. But for purposes of the transfer, it says a substantial impairment of mental or physical capacity. And as you know, substantial means basically whatever the eye of the beholder is.
Amen.
And so you're opening yourself up for it to be substantial if there's alcohol or any kind of substance involved in any way. And so you cannot sell firearms or ammunition to some recklessly, and it's not even knowingly. And so this could be an accident from your standpoint if you had some evidence maybe that there was alcohol or some kind of substance involved, and you sell that firearm or ammunition then you can get in trouble, and that would be a Class A misdemeanor. It may not happen. It may be more practical for like academy and other places like that. But I thought it was a fun and at least maybe a somewhat of a good tip to know. And I think we all know about transferring to a felons. I just want to point out you really should check to see, do a background check or things like that. It's another reason to go through Matt. And it's not just on the state level. It's on the federal level. And
I got a question about that.
Yeah.
You know, on the state level, it says that you've committed a crime if you knowingly sell a firearm or ammunition or to a person who's been convicted of felony. And then it goes on and talks about some people who've been out on supervision, parole. But then that's the state law. It says knowingly sell. But the U.S. code says it shall be unlawful for any person to sell or otherwise dispose, and then it goes on, knowing or having reasonable cause to believe that such person is under indictment or convicted. It seems like in Texas, looks like when you read this, that, you know I'm selling the gun to somebody. Now, I may not know and may not have any reasonable belief to believe that that person is a felon, but it looks like if I know I'm selling a felon a gun, even though I don't know they're a felon, that I've committed a crime.
You're about to open up Pandora's box, so I want to say one thing on this. I'm going to answer your question, but I want to get this out because this is going to take us into a whole new subject. And it is, if you are going to sell a firearm to a felon, and that could be a family member. You think this doesn't apply to you, but you got a family member, oh, he's doing better. You know, Rick's out on probation, you know, and he just got off probation, doing great, you know, and he wants to go hunting next year. So if you want to sell it, make sure that it must be the 5th anniversary of the later of either one of these, the release from confinement or their release from community supervision, their probation. So it's either they've got to be off probation for 5 years or they have to have been out of jail for 5 years. If it's within that time period, you're going to be in trouble for selling them or transferring that firearm. Okay, that selling a firearm or ammunition. And it's going to be hard to say you didn't know, obviously, if you're a family member.
Well, Ross, I'm a little confused. I thought a felon could not possess a firearm.
That's true.
So how would
But you're going to be in trouble for being the one to sell him that firearm.
Okay, well, he's going to be in trouble either way then, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So, and to answer your question, that goes into, on the federal level, right, the standard of proof and what they can show as far as knowing, on the federal level, it's the reasonable cause to believe. Okay? And so this was a problem when we're talking about illegal foreign nationals. And back in 2010, there was a good case of a guy who sold a firearm to somebody that walked into a gun show, and the guy had a valid driver's license. And the ATF and the feds were there to do a sting operation, and they happened to see this transfer go down, and they ended up arresting this gentleman for not because he had reasonable cause to believe that it was an illegal foreign national. And so they go to trial and they said, well, the guy was Mexican, he wore cowboy boots, and he spoke Spanish. You had reasonable cause to believe that he was an illegal foreign national. In my opinion, that's racist, right? There's problems with that. I don't agree with that at all. It's all over the internet. You can pull it up. You can Google illegal foreign national transfer firearm in Texas.
Now, was he arrested or
He was. He was tried and convicted.
Convicted for that?
Actually, yes,
Wow, that
convicted.
sounds like it's an unconstitutional situation to me.
And so at that point in time, this is why everybody's getting so strict about doing the background checks and making sure that people sign off on things like Matt's saying in a bill of sale, because if you don't do these things, they can use any kind of evidence at all whatsoever to say you had reasonable cause to believe. And reasonable is another one of those eye of the beholder words, like substantial.
Well, getting back to this 5-year thing you were talking about, everybody's got some black sheeps in their family. So let's say
I'm one of them.
Let's say cousin Benny shows up at the family reunion, and I know that he's been out of prison for 10 years.
But maybe you didn't know he had another condition, and when he got out, he was stayed on probation.
Well, he would be an ex-felon. We know that, right?
We know that.
Okay, so all this other stuff you just talked about, let's say that I go ahead and sell Benny my 9mm. Wouldn't I be aiding and abetting him, since I know that it's a crime
commit
for
that
him
crime?
to have the 9mm?
If you thought that he was off for the length of period, but then yes, you go back to because felon in possession of a firearm is a felony, and so then if you're going to sell to a person for the purpose of committing an unlawful act, then that is a crime in and of itself. And here's the kicker: you're going to be aiding and abetting, so you can be charged with felon in possession of a firearm, and right, you're going to be in trouble for transfer of a weapon for an unlawful purpose.
Yeah. Okay.
And so don't do it.
Don't do it. So
I
that
know
brings
he's
us
begging
back
you
to-
to do it, and he's saying, "Man, I changed, but don't do it." Okay, tell him to go buy it from Matt.
So that brings us back to the whole idea
Matt
that
can
if you
try.
do want to get rid of your personal guns, to go to a licensed gun dealer who generally for a small fee will do that for you. Now, you're talking about the foreign nationals. You got to be careful with people who have dishonorable discharges, or somebody who has renounced their citizenship. I don't know anybody who's renounced their citizenship, but that's just one of the things thrown in there.
The dishonorable discharge was one that I had forgotten about. I thrown it out there. And how are you going to know? How are you going to know that?
Well, if again, in Texas it says knowingly sell. The U.S. code says if you have reasonable belief. So I would say you wouldn't be breaking the law, the federal law, but you might be breaking the Texas law if you don't really check it out. There's also stuff about if you sell your gun to somebody else, shipping it across state lines. You have to be careful about that. I think the best idea is definitely go to a gun dealer who can ship it, or at least have it received by a gun dealer.
And I'll cover briefly, because we're almost getting to the point where we want to talk about what maybe you should do if you try to structure your own bill of sale. We didn't cover protective orders. It is illegal to sell, rent, lease, loan, or give a handgun to a person knowing that an active protective order is directed to the person to whom the handgun is to be delivered. So again,
And
this
it
covers.
doesn't matter if that protective order is for you or for your cousin. It's just illegal to do it if there's a protective order out there, period.
But and this might, I mean, this is so specific that it probably only applies to lawyers who are in the business. But maybe if somebody's listening that happens so to be under a protective order, it does not apply to a temporary protective order. And that would happen, like, let's say that you get falsely accused of some kind of domestic assault. They're going to issue a temporary protective order right off the bat, no matter what happens. Okay, and that thing may stay in effect, 30 to 90 days. And there may not have been a hearing because it could have been continued or anything like that, and then the case ends up getting dismissed. There's supposed to be a hearing sooner than that,
Yeah,
but
10
it does happen.
10 days, right?
Yes, but it does happen where it gets continued, and I've seen it, and it's been strategy from my side
Sure.
to try to drag that out and to try to get my client out of trouble before any other consequences happen. And so, if it's just a temporary protective order, and this may not apply, it does not apply to this rule.
Yeah, a lot of times the client will wait till 9.5 days before they open the door to your office, right?
That's right. That's typical.
So,
practice,
yeah,
actually.
we got a hearing at 9 o'clock in the morning.
That's
Ross,
right.
can you help me out?
It's kind of like Matt telling me to make an opinion piece 24 hours before the show. I'm probably exaggerating, but I got ADHD, so I digress. So back to the bill of sale. If we didn't go to Matt, what are some things maybe we should try to put in that bill of sale?
Well, we ought to go to Matt. But if we're going to do it ourselves, we want to get a bill of sale where the person who's buying it pretty much says that he's never been convicted of a crime that's punishable by imprisonment to exceed a year. Remember, we have heard a lot about that in the news lately about the fellow who in military court had been convicted of a crime that he could have been punished for more than a year, but it never got put on the national database. So you want to get them to say that they've never been convicted, that they're not a fugitive of justice, that they're not an unlawful user of or addicted to any controlled substance. I think we missed that one a little while ago.
Which would apply to the intoxication stuff too, yeah.
Well, but I mean,
If
even
they're not a
someone's
user
not
of,
intoxicated,
that's
but
right.
you know that
You're
they're
right.
addicted.
That's a federal offense.
Yeah. Has never been adjudicated of any kind of a mental disease. We talked about that a little while ago. Is not an illegal alien or unlawfully in the United States. Has not been discharged with a dishonorable discharge. Let me see. Has never renounced their citizenship. Again, I don't know anybody that's ever done that, but hey, I guess they're out there. Is not subject to the court order you just talked about, the restraining order, and has not been convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. That's one we missed a little while ago. And cannot lawfully receive, possess, or ship or transfer a firearm. That's kind of one of those catch-all things. It's not a person under indictment. So, you want to tell them, and I know this sounds silly, but they've got to sign an affidavit saying they don't intend to use it while they're intoxicated, and they don't intend to use it for any illegal offense. and that they are not legally prohibited from buying, receiving, or possessing firearms. In other words, that felony thing I talked about. And I think basically it's kind of tough to get somebody to swear that they're of sound mind, but if you have that in there, it's kind of like asking someone who's been knocked out.
Purple
How long were you
elephants,
knocked
Judge.
out?
Purple elephants.
That's right.
and so it's hard to cover everything, every single illegal transfer law in the segment that we have. And so we encourage you, if you have questions or you're going to do it, don't do it yourself. Go to a professional like Matt. If you want to come by my office, if you got some questions, feel free to do that. I'm at 105 East Main Street in Cameron. I'm across from the courthouse. You can call my office at 254-605-4140 or Benton at watson.legal, or go to Rick's office and you can contact him over at Capolino.Krebs. And if you got anything else to tell fellow folks before we get out of here.
Well, we don't want to make you paranoid